Every year, my friends and I organize an annual camping expedition, timed perfectly with the new year. What adds an extra layer of excitement to our tradition is the pact we've established. Each year, one of us takes the responsibility of selecting a camping site, a choice shrouded in secrecy until we actually arrive there. In the most recent New Year's celebration, the honor of selecting fell to Ray. The spontaneity of this arrangement is something I truly relish. Our destination for that year led us to a secluded forest in New Jersey. It was an uncharted territory for us, amplifying the thrill even further. Venturing deep into the woods, we embarked on a satisfying hike. The experience included engaging in night fishing, enjoying music, and indulging in drinks until we reached that point of intoxication where everything becomes uproariously funny. Eventually, the clock struck past 1 a.m., signaling the end of our revelry. Sleeping arrangements were a bit tight, with Ray and I sharing one tent, while Luke and Matthew occupied another. Amid our attempts to fall asleep, the boisterous laughter of Luke and Matthew infiltrated the night. At the outset, their amusement was infectious, prompting Ray and me to join in the laughter. However, before long, their continuous mirth transformed into an annoyance. Our exasperation prompted us to shout at them to quiet down and sleep. But then, an unsettling twist emerged as they responded that the laughter wasn't theirs. The effect was chilling, jolting me awake. It was apparent that the laughter resonating through the woods wasn't coming from both our friends. It was a singular, unfamiliar laughter. Even in my inebriated state, I recognized the peculiarity of someone's presence so deep in the woods at such an hour. The eerie laughter grew steadily closer, amplifying our discomfort. Ray and I were no longer alone in our tent. Our friends had sought refuge with us, seeking solace in numbers. As the laughter drew nearer, its source became discernible. A male voice, seemingly in his 40s, laughing as though under the influence, engaged in jovial banter with companions that only he could hear. There was an uncanny quality to the laughter, a certain unsettling element that words can't quite encapsulate. One would have needed to experience it firsthand to truly grasp its eerie nature. The laughter drew close to the perimeter of our campsite, yet not a single footstep could be heard. This lack of audible movement was inexplicable. Navigating that terrain without generating any sound was implausible. Abruptly, the laughter ceased, leaving us in a heavy silence. We stared at each other, united by our shared sense of unease, each of us grappling with our own fears while striving to maintain composure. The silence was eventually shattered by the sound of something brushing against the nylon fabric of our tent. Moonlight revealed the outline of a hand pressing against the material. Panic propelled us to scream in unison before hastily vacating the tent. We sprinted through the woods, our other friends close on our heels. After a frantic 15-minute dash, we stumbled upon our car, our lifeline out of that chilling scenario. Racing to a nearby motel, we spent the remainder of the night there, seeking refuge in the well-lit and populated surroundings. Later, as I delved into research about camping in New Jersey's Pine Barrens, I stumbled upon a multitude of tales circulating online about the discovery of deceased individuals within the area. To this day, I'm convinced that if we hadn't hastily departed, our fate might have transformed into an enigma, a puzzle with no clear solution. Max and I had always been drawn to the thrill of adventure. In fact, it was during a camping trip that he proposed to me. So, to celebrate my birthday this year, we opted for a getaway to the gorge, seeking some quality time together in the midst of nature. This was our inaugural experience camping as a duo. In the past, our outdoor escapades involved larger groups of friends and family. But let's get back to the story. Upon reaching our destination, Max and I disembarked from the car to organize our equipment for the hike to our chosen camping site. Out of nowhere, two unfamiliar figures materialized, casting unsettling glances our way before retreating into their aged camper van. I must admit, a sense of discomfort washed over me, yet I brushed it aside and proceeded towards our camping spot. We had ventured to this area before, but always in larger groups, so this marked our first solo expedition. Max and I knew the lay of the land quite well. Upon arrival, we scouted various camping locations before settling on the perfect one. Higher up the hill, we noticed another camper, prompting us to choose a spot further down to maintain our privacy. Though we were indeed concealed from view, we weren't out of earshot. The persistent shouts of a man echoed for hours on end. As twilight descended, we hastened to set up camp. Max suggested gathering firewood, prompting us to venture out. At that moment, an unexpected stranger approached, offering his assistance. I declined with a shake of my head, attempting to ignore him. But he persisted, proposing to sell us a bundle of firewood for $15. This proposition amused Max, given the ample wood around us that we could gather for free. "We're good, thanks. We'll manage on our own," I responded curtly before we moved away. Yet, the man positioned himself in our path, insisting that we wouldn't find any firewood due to recent clearing by park rangers. Max questioned his certainty, prompting the man to share that he had been camping there alone for the past month. His narrative was riddled with inconsistencies, revealing his deception. He claimed to have a nearby house and later mentioned his experiences of homelessness. Gradually, he persuaded us to inspect his own campsite. Reluctantly, we followed him uphill, only to discover that he wasn't alone as he had stated. Whispering voices emanated from the foliage, and a camper van became visible in the distance. "I have a clear view of everything and everyone from here. It's a great spot," he asserted. Our departure was swift. Soon after, the man reappeared near our campsite. With darkness enveloping the area, he aided us in starting a fire. I attempted to politely guide him back up the hill, needing a moment to process the unsettling events. Finally, he left, and I whispered to Max that I couldn't fathom spending the night near this shady character without some means of protection. Max managed to convince me to stay put, and we planned to tough it out. Throughout the night, the sound of snapping twigs and rustling branches surrounded our tent, as if someone was observing us. My intuition told me it was the same man. Eventually, we spotted him standing outside, staring at us. The situation turned deeply unnerving. Quietly, I urged Max to pack up quickly so we could leave. As I stood with my backpack, ready to depart, the man's voice emerged from the shadows, taunting. "Leaving so soon?" Fear coursed through me, yet I managed to stay composed as we hastened away from the campsite. What was most unsettling was that, even as we retreated, the man's calls for us to return persisted, intensifying our anxiety. Deep down, both Max and I sensed that the man wasn't acting alone, and his intentions were dubious at best. If we had stayed longer, who knows what he might have done. His motives could have ranged from theft to violence, or even worse. Once a month, our school organized hiking trips as part of our extracurricular activities and personal growth. This particular experience occurred during the summer of 2015, when I was 13 years old. Originally, my friend was meant to be my tent partner, but unexpectedly pulled out of the trip, leaving me to set up and occupy the tent on my own. I wasn't bothered by this arrangement. Solitude didn't trouble me. After a full day of hiking, we returned to the campsite as night was falling. Setting up our tents became a challenge, and as I struggled alone with the tent in the growing darkness, it seemed to take an eternity. Thankfully, a fellow team member came to my aid. Later, we all enjoyed dinner and gathered around the campfire to sing songs. As far as my memory serves, everything was proceeding smoothly. However, this changed when Josh, an irritating individual, persuaded the group to share spooky stories. Horror tales were my ultimate aversion, a sentiment that remains unchanged to this day. Feeling averse to the horror stories being told, I excused myself from the campfire and retreated to my tent. The isolation didn't bother me. In fact, I appreciated the additional space. Quickly, I drifted off to sleep, only to awaken in the middle of the night. The surroundings were tranquil and silent, the time showing around 2 a.m. Despite my attempts, sleep evaded me. Suddenly, After a minute or two, I discerned a figure nearby. My immediate assumption was that it was another team member heading out, perhaps to relieve themselves. Although our tents were pitched a distance apart, this was not an unusual occurrence. I remained still, but unease gnawed at me as I realized the person's physique was unfamiliar. Towering at about 6 feet, and with a lean build, the figure's appearance contradicted those of our hiking group, none of whom exceeded 5 feet 10 inches. Carefully unzipping my tent, I aimed my flashlight towards the figure for a better view. My suspicion was confirmed. It was an unknown man. His deep brown eyes, thin lips, and elongated nose lent him an eerie countenance. In an unsettling gesture, he smiled at me, placing a finger on his lips, signaling for silence. An immediate regret washed over me. I shouldn't have directed my light towards him, drawing his attention. In a matter of seconds, the man began moving, limping toward my tent in a circular path. Dread overwhelmed me, nameless and paralyzing. At a certain point, the impulse to flee and seek help surged within me. Despite this, I focused on calming myself. Curling up in the center of the tent, I pulled my limbs close to my chest. Motionless, I watched as the man outside deliberately poked at my tent. My heart raced, but fear stifled my voice, preventing me from screaming. Suddenly, a violent thrust from outside the tent struck, yet the fabric held. In this fight-or-flight juncture, I made a swift decision. Turning around, I sprinted towards our supervisor's tent, shrieking like a child. He emerged before I reached the tent, and I recounted the eerie encounter. He and the rest of the team rushed to my tent, only to find it empty. However, they did discern the traces of the man's presence in the form of footprints encircling the tent. Following this unsettling event, we were instructed to relocate our tents, clustering them closely together. The remainder of the trip was cut short, and as we descended from the campsite and reached the nearby village, my eyes fell upon a picture attached to a pole. The man's image labeled "Most Wanted." A silent scream of shock echoed within me. Since that incident, I've never embarked on another camping adventure, nor do I intend to.